£44, 8 ounces. A new lake record, £46 and 5 ounces. Yes! That'll do. And that's a damn sight lot bigger than £54. Oh my God, I'm blown away. 43 and a quarter. Oh, how about that? £60 and 4 ounces. Now, I'm sure you will all agree that 2020 was a rather strange year and a year that none of us will be forgetting in a hurry. In terms of fishing, I had my best year ever. My target at the start of the year, when I hit the ground running in January, was to catch 50 30s or 50 fish over £30, and I ended the year on nearly 100. I had 11 40-pounders and a 50, as well as going abroad and achieving one of my lifetime ambitions to fish Rainbow Lake in France. So without further ado, let's have a little run through of what happened in each month of the year. So obviously the start of the year is January, and after spending Christmas with the family, I was absolutely itching to get back out after New Year. Had New Year's Day at home, but I was on the gate bright and early at Linear Fisheries on the 2nd of January. I didn't really know what venue I wanted to go on to. I always turn up there with an open mind, but one of the venues this particular time that I had in mind was St John's. Always has brilliant winter form. You don't need a lot of bait. It's very, very simple fishing. And one of my mates was joining me. So back then, obviously we could have a social. So I started the year with a social on St John's. Now St John's has got brilliant winter form. It's a lake that I've always done well on in the winter. You don't need no bait, literally solid bags, a few maggots inside, and you're good to go. I hit the ground running there. 12 fish, topped by a 30-pounder, but whilst I was there, I was hearing reports that Hardwick was doing a few fish. Now Hardwick has got a lot of fish in it, and there's one peg in particular that if you hit it right, you can have an absolutely phenomenal session. The weather that we had coming was good. I knew deep down that there was chance of a good session, so I lined up a bit of filming with photography. So Elliot and Dave, they joined me 2 nights into my session, and yeah, let's just say the session was absolutely mental. Over 50 bites, a trio of 30s, topped off by one of the lake's biggest and oldest residents at just under £35. My best session on Hardwick to date, and it was all captured on film. So yeah, you know, a session that will live with me for a very, very long time. Tactics wise, it was a bit of a, turned out to be one of them sessions where I used a lot of bait. A load of mulched up boilies, sweet corn and hemp, and tiny slow sinking maggot cluster hook baits over the top. Little and often baiting, definitely kept the bites coming. So for January, yeah, that was pretty incredible. Had one more session on St John's late in January after the topography filming, had another dozen or so fish up to over £30. So yeah, that really did set the precedent for 2020. So moving on into February, and I had a bit of a plan in my head. Now, up until middle of Feb, I suppose it would, I'd only ever caught one 40-pounder from the Linear complex, and Brasenose 1 in particular was one of them lakes that I've, I suppose, grown up fishing and seen it mature over the years, and there's a lot of big fish in there, and I fished it a lot, and I've never been fortunate enough to catch a 40. Now there must be a dozen 15 40-pounders in there, so I knew that by dedicating a bit of time onto there, that there was probably a good chance that, you know, I might potentially catch one. So I started off the year doing a magazine feature on Brasenose 1, moved 3 or 4 times until I eventually found the fish and had a mega hit of fish, including 5 over £30. Now, like I say, they're big fish, but I know that there's a lot of big fish in there. As you can imagine, I was itching to get back up, and as luck would have it, I had a bit of a session booked in with Carpology to do a little bit of filming. Now, this particular session was a little bit different, and I decided to do something a little bit different. Normally, I would fish solid from the time I got there till the time I went home. But I think by doing that, sometimes you're putting constant pressure in the swim, and you know, the big fish are big for a reason. They eat, but they're also very wise. So I'd caught quite a few fish prior to the cameras getting there. Knowing that the cameras were turning up, I wound the rods in, put a couple of spods out, went down the shops and just rested the peg. Now when I got back, I put the rods back out, and I don't reckon I'd been out there 20 minutes, and I had a real slow take on the middle rod. And I've caught a lot of fish out of there. You sort of get to know how they fight. Now, when you hook, you know, a 20 or a 30, they can be a bit scrappy, but this fish just felt a little bit different. And I played it all the way in, and sure enough, there it was. After my second session in, having a go on B1, I'd caught a 40. £42 and 5 ounces of cold February mirror carp. How about that for a proper unit? I've tried for so many years to catch a big one out of B1. I've watched the stock grow, get bigger, other people catch 40s, and this time around it's my turn. 42 pounds, 10 ounces of Brasenose 1 mirror carp just at the start of February. Absolutely over the moon. What an absolute unit, and to catch it right in the depth of winter. Not that it feels like winter, but my arms are certainly feeling it in this freezing cold water. 42 pounds, 10 ounces. I am absolutely over the moon. Off it goes, nice and strong. Oh my God. Yes! So yeah, another brilliant session. So by middle of February, I think I'd had 15 fish over 30 pound and a 40. End of February, I had a family holiday booked over to Cape Verde. So off we went on our travels, and yeah, on return from our trip to Cape Verde, which actually got extended due to the coronavirus pandemic, was when I come home, was when we went into lockdown. So yeah, like everybody else, I had to stay at home and pass most of spring, which is normally my favourite time of year to be fishing, staying at home, locked up indoors, doing my bit. And my first session back, I got invited up to fish at RH Fisheries Avenue. Rob does it every year, invites a couple of us up to have a go. Obviously socially distanced, so we was on our own, but it was nice just to get away and finally get the rods out. Now that venue in particular holds a very, very good head of big carp, and I fished it a couple of times before, and so I'm well aware of what's in there and how to fish it. And as you can imagine, middle of May, I was buzzing to get out there. The fish are at their prime weights, and yeah, they're almost become a little bit easier to catch as well. So yeah, so I trundled up there for a 2-night session, and what a session that turned out to be. The first bite, a 42 pound mirror, closely followed by a scrape of 40, then a 43 pound common. That, to be honest, I would have been happy with. But the following day, in the middle of the afternoon, when you wouldn't expect it to go, off it goes. And I knew it was a good fish from the get-go. It hit the surface, a big set of shoulders sort of popped up out of the water, and all the way in, the fish just wallowed in on the surface. And I knew that, you know, this was a proper big one. And yeah, as like I say, as luck would have it, it turned out to be a big one. A fish called Moon Scale, 52 pounds and 5 ounces. What a way to come out of lockdown. So with the lockdown restrictions lifted, the session on the avenue out the way, it was now time to head back to Linear. Now, Linear in May is absolutely phenomenal. If you time it right, the fish haven't spawned yet, they're at their maximum weight, and you can have a really, really good session. With the lockdown being lifted, obviously a lot of people wanted to go fishing, so I knew that travelling up there, it was going to be busy. Now, I got there nice and early on the gate, had a drive round, and yeah, it was busy, to be expected, and I knew it was going to be busy. But persistent driving around, speaking to people, seeing what people are doing, 3 nights at my disposal again, like I do most weeks, and I knew that if I got the bait out there and I set my stall out, that it could be a really, really good session. But I didn't quite expect it to turn out the way it did. The peg in question was the point swim. Absolutely brilliant peg. There's a good spot out in front of it, and it always holds fish. Now, like I say, I proper set my stall out because I wasn't going to be moving for the duration of my session. Got my bait in position, and it didn't take long to get the first bite. Now, up until the second day, when a cameraman from Fox joined me to do a bit of product filming, I'd had over 30 bites, including 12 fish over 30 pounds. But the only fish that I caught during the day while we were filming was the one that I really, really wanted, and that was the big ghostie at over 37 pounds. It's a fish that doesn't come out very often, so to catch it whilst the cameras were there made it even more special. So coming into the middle part of the year, the hottest part and usually the worst part, I decided to turn my attention onto Oxley's. Now, Oxley's has got a 50 pound common in it, as well as 3 or 4 backup 40 pound mirrors. And the common is one of the nicest commons that I've ever seen, and one that I would dearly love to catch. I started off in June, doing a couple of nights on there, not really settling on a swim, just flitting around, fishing bags, fishing zigs. And I did manage to catch a few, nothing massive, but it sort of just gave me a bit of a feel for the lake. So yeah, like I say, the start of June, had a couple of fish just flitting around, doing some bits and pieces. But middle of June, I decided that was it. I'm going to go down, I'm going to do a 3-night session, I'm going to settle in a swim where And I know everyone says it, a fish comes from a particular swim, so I was going to try and get in this peg that it had been caught from before. So yeah, got down there, roasting hot day, sky high pressure, fish cruising around on the top, but I opted not to fish zigs. Now, the reason for this is I've done it for so many years on that complex, and all it's ever caught me is, I say smaller fish up to 30 pound. It's never ever done me, or a lot of the other anglers, many big fish. So I decided to set my stall out, let all the little fish, or the smaller fish, swim around in the upper layers, hoping that the big ones are down on the bottom. And to be honest, I've never felt that I've ever got so lucky in my life. The day that I got there was absolutely scorching hot. Like I say, the air pressure was sky high, almost weather where you were struggling to breathe after you've pushed a barrow for more than 2 minutes. I settled in a peg, found a spot, put a bit of bait out, 3 rods over the top, and from the off, just started catching. Now I was fishing down by the island, so the water is a little bit shallower there, but I was absolutely gobsmacked to start catching from the off. So I'd had about 7 or 8 fish, I think it was. Was getting a little bit complacent with chucking the rods out because I had to do a few other little bits and pieces while I was there as well. But decided, you know what, I'm just going to put the rods back out, not going to put any more bait over the top, I'm just going to leave them, and sort of what will be, and I'll sort them out once I've done what I needed to do. Middle of the afternoon, 3-4 o'clock, the middle rod pulled up tight, dropped back to the floor, and yeah, I went down to the rod, just walked down to the rod like I do, picked it up, expecting it to be a small one or a tench. But yeah, it certainly wasn't small. This fish absolutely beasted me. It was going up and down the margin. Now the margins on Oxleys are quite deep, but to try and get him over the shelf takes a bit of doing. And I knew this fish was a good one. I could just tell, like where the line entered the water, where the vortexes were, I could just tell it was a big fish. So I literally took the trousers off, waded straight out into the lake with a landing net, wanting to get it as soon as it popped up. And yeah, lo and behold, it turned out to be the biggest mirror in the lake prior to it spawning as well. And let's just say it was very, very big, 46 pounds and 5 ounces, which at the time was the lake record mirror. So yeah, what a session and what a start to my little time that I was going to put in on Oxleys. I'd done a few more sessions throughout late June and into July, and by this time I was flying. I'd almost got Oxleys sussed. I knew what they were doing on the wind, and I knew what they were doing on certain weather. So with this in mind, I lined up a little bit of filming photography in the middle of August. Dave, the cameraman, joined me on Monday. I'd arrived on Sunday to ensure that I'd got a decent swim. The conditions were absolutely bang on. The common hadn't been out for 6 or 8 weeks. Now, I know that doesn't sound very long, but that fish doesn't come out for a year, but will then come out sort of once and then 6 or 8 weeks after. So I knew that maybe I'd got the timing absolutely bang on. It was just a case of if I was going to catch with the cameras in front of me. True to form, the session turned out to be another red letter session, and it must just be, whilst I'm out with Dave and Elliot from Photography, they must be my good luck charms, because I managed to catch nearly 40 carp to over 40 pounds, all captured live on film as well. Unfortunately though, no common, and 2 days later the common come out from directly opposite from where I was fishing at a shade under 50 pound. Now that's not to say I would have caught it, but it must have been somewhere in the vicinity of where I was fishing whilst I was down. But you know, that's just fishing, so I won't be going back onto Oxleys now until probably middle of this year, when it will be due to come out a couple of times again. So on to September now, and it was time for a new challenge. Now all of you will know that I absolutely love my day ticket fishing, but back in April my ticket had come up for a syndicate that I'd been wanting to get on for a number of years. Living down in the southwest, the Cotswold Water Park is not too far away from where I live, and that was exactly where my ticket was. Itching to get on there and have a go, I sort of spent the middle part of the year, if you like, fishing linear in search of the Oxleys common, to no avail. But yeah, September come around and it was time to finally get on the syndicate. So I got down there nice and early, had a walk around, found some fish, decided to set up off of the fish and set up in an area of the lake where a new wind was going to be blowing into in 24 hours time. Found the spot, got my bait out, and I fished it very, very similar to how I'd fish Manor. A whole bucket of bait on the spot, 3 rods over the top, and just left it. Now I had 3 nights at my disposal, and I was hoping and praying that over them 3 nights something was going to come my way. Now the lake itself, has got over 300 fish in it, which is a fair amount of fish. It's 24 acres in size, but each and every fish is absolutely stunning. There's linears, fully scaled, levers, commons. Yeah, you know, the fish in there are just out of this world. The first night passed, didn't get a bite. The second night, however, about midnight, I don't know what I was doing. I was just sat there, sort of tying rigs or, you know, sorting something out in the bag. And yeah, bang, away it goes. Now, still, wherever I fish, as soon as that buzzer goes, my heart starts racing, but none more so than when you're on a lake that you've never fished before, or should I say that you've never caught from before. First bite turned out to be a real nice 18-pound mirror, soon followed by another at 23 pound. Now, from that I learned that these fish want an initial hit of bait, leave it, catch a few fish, and then put your bait out the following day, which is exactly what I did. Another bucket of bait out the following day, and as luck would have it, just as I was packing up on the last morning, I was greeted with my first 30 from the lake, a nice heavily scaled 32-pound mirror. So packing up from that session, I was itching to get back. However, I wasn't able to get back, or potentially wasn't able to get back to the lake for 5 weeks. Now, the reason why is because it's been one of my lifelong ambitions to go to Rainbow Lake in France, and a session come up, or should I say a date come up 3 years ago for October 2020. And in spite of a global pandemic, travel restrictions getting there, having to quarantine for 2 weeks when we got home, I was adamant that nothing was going to stop me from getting to Rainbow. And indeed, nothing did stop me. The session was booked from the 2nd to the 9th of October. And yeah, I have waited for this trip for years and years and years. I grew up watching loads of videos on YouTube, and I know it might not appeal to everybody, that lake, but I think it's one of them lakes that everyone should say they've had an opportunity and they've been there. It is like nowhere I have ever been in the world carp fishing. And yeah, boy oh boy did it turn out to be a session of a lifetime. Before I left, everyone always has high hopes of going to France to catching a 70, an 80 or even a 90 pounder. But for me, even though it's a long way and there's a lot of big fish in there, I just wanted to catch a 50-pound carp from Rainbow. And to say that I'd done that would have been a lifetime ambition achieved. But the session had other ideas. We was in a very, very good swim, peg 18, extremely prolific, a lot of big fish hang around the snags in front of there, but like I say, it's fishing like I've never done before. I've never fished from a boat before, not very often I've used braided reel line before, and fishing tight to snags in the way that you have to at Rainbow is certainly like nothing that I've ever done before. 2 days into the trip, I'd already caught my 50-pounder, but the rod went over just after I'd had some breakfast, and yeah, I went one better and managed to catch a 60-pounder, which absolutely blew me away. The fish in Rainbow, they look 10 pounds bigger than what they actually are, and to be there playing a 60-pound carp from a boat, again, something that I've not done before, and having it pop up in front of you is certainly, you know, a memory that will live with me forever. How about that? 60-pound and 4 ounces. The session went on and I ended up the week on 18 fish, 4 fish over 50 pound, including a 60-pound common. So once my quarantine was over, I was itching to get back to the syndicate, but I had one more filming trip booked in with Fox up at Linear at the start of November. As is always the case, I like to arrive a day early to make sure I can get a swim, get it rocking, and hopefully catch whilst the cameras are there. But this session turned out not really according to plan, shall we say. I arrived there, waited all day to get a swim. The weather was absolutely bang on. I got everything in place, got the rods out and started catching from the off. And for some reason last year, I've never caught so many big fish, and you know, I'd put a lot of time and effort in previous years to catch a 40 out of Linear, and at this point they were just coming along, one after another. And yeah, I was catching a few fish. I'd had, I think, a brace of 30s, 2 or 3 20s, and then it ripped off again. Now the pegs on Brasenose one are quite tight, and I'm always very sort of cautious if it's going to kite over someone else's line. So I always fish there and keep the lead on, because I found fishing the busier lakes, by keeping the lead on, the fish tend not to kite as much as what they would do if the lead was off. big 4 3/4 ounce leads on because we've got a massive crosswind and a big undertow. My fishing, I'll be honest with you, was a little bit slapdash. I was fishing 100 yards, 25, 30 mile an hour crosswind, and it was one of them. It was going all right. It wasn't going bang on, but I could accept where the spoms were going for the conditions that we had. Rod's gone, I'm playing it, I've got the rod nice and low, and it just felt different, and it felt big. And sure enough, it was. I netted it, and it turned out to be a fish that, you know, even though there's a lot of fish in Brasenose 1, a fish that I've seen photographed a few times, but one that doesn't really come out a lot. And it had last been caught at 37 pound, and yeah, got him on the scales, 43 pound 5 ounces. So, you know, I hit the ground running in November, and you know, I couldn't believe it. A spontaneous trip to Linear, but it was just my luck though that when the cameras arrived, the bobbins remained motionless. But it was a good job. I got a little bit of amateur film on my phone. So I mentioned that before I went to Rainbow, I was doing a bit of time on my syndicate, and I was eager to get back. But knowing that I couldn't get back for 4 or 5 weeks meant that the next time I was able to go was at the start of November. The weather had remained fairly consistent, the temperatures were still mild, and yeah, the first week of November, the weather was absolutely phenomenal, and that was when I went back up to my syndicate water. Now, I wouldn't say it's an easy water by any stretch of the imagination, but if you get on the fish, there's enough fish in there that you can get a hit of fish together, and I was confident that what I'd learnt last time, taking forward into November, I'd have a good chance of getting a couple more bites. 3 nights and 13 bites later, it had been my best session on the syndicate, including a trio of 30 pounders, and yeah, included in that lot as well was 2 30-pound fully scaled. So as you can imagine, the time that I'd put in on the syndicate, learning it before I went back in November, was well worth it. If my year would have ended there, I would have been absolutely over the moon, and it would have been my best year to date. But it wasn't over just yet, and I had one more filming trip booked in with Monster Particles down on Berners Hall in Essex. Now, I've never fished it before. I'd only ever seen photographs and spoken to a few people that had fished it before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And again, a new venue, so I took with me exactly what works for me everywhere else. And yeah, let's just say the session turned out to be absolutely phenomenal. I arrived late on the Saturday night. It's a 4-hour drive from my home in Somerset, so I arrived in the hours of darkness, waiting for first light to have a good walk round to see who was leaving and where the fish had been coming out from. Now, Berners in particular, if you've seen it, there's an island there. Now, whenever I've seen photographs before, it's always quite apparent that there's a big area of dead water behind them islands where not many people can reach, and that would be an area that I would always try and target, a place that's out of reach for most people, a little safe haven for the fish to reside in if they're being pressured. I managed to get in a very good swim there, knowing that I was going to be filming for 3 days. I proper set my stall out, got properly set up, and yeah, in hope really that the session was going to turn out brilliantly. Now, the weather wasn't exactly in my favour. High pressure, clear skies, thick frost at night, and if I'm honest, I didn't really expect to catch many, but with the way that filming had gone throughout the year, it was always in the back of my mind that, you know, I could get lucky again, and certainly, you know, I did get very lucky. The first night of the trip, 6 fish, topped off by a common called Leah at 43 pounds and 10 ounces, another 40 pounder from another day ticket venue. Throughout the duration of the session, I didn't do anything that was mind-blowing, but one thing that I did do, now for those of you that know, Berners is very open, and it was rather windy when I was there. One thing I did do is I fished at a range that I could bait accurately regardless of the weather, and I think that definitely helped me. There was lads there who were trying to spom into the middle, and you could see the minute the spom left the rod, the wind was taking the braid and it was just pulling the spom off course. And yeah, things like that can turn your session around, and if you're baiting inaccurately at range, you know, you're simply not going to catch. Bring the fish to you where you can fish from nice and accurately every single time. The session, like I say, panned out to be absolutely brilliant. I went on to catch, like I say, Leah, 43 pounds 10, one called the Upfront Common at 39 pound 1 ounce, and literally about 15 minutes before we were due to wrap up filming and call it a day, it ripped off again, and I had one of the biggest commons in the lake, the patch common, at 44 pounds 8 ounces. So another absolutely brilliant session, all caught on film, which is over on the Monster Particles YouTube channel. As is always the way we're filming, a lot of it is last minute. Now, I'd had a couple of days come up with carpology at Linear Fisheries, and despite the weather being absolutely pants, we had it booked in the diary, so we were going to go irrespective of the result. Now, I've had a lot of fish out of Brasenose 2, I've had a lot of 30s out of Brasenose 2, and there's only a handful of 40 pounders in there. And you know, the likelihood of catching one, certainly on a day session, which Linear was day sessions only then due to the COVID restrictions, seemed pretty remote. Got there, bright blue skies, freezing cold, cold north-northeasterly wind, and to be honest, I sort of turned to Joe and said, you know, what is the point of this? What are we here for? We're not going to catch anything. And it looked absolutely bleak. But we'd travelled all that way, we'd put the effort in, and we wasn't going to go home and just give up. Rods out, again, fishing on the point swim. No one was on the lake at the time. Hadn't seen a fish, was getting dive bombed by coots, tufties all day, and it just looked rubbish. And about midday, I just said to Joe, look, we'll give it another hour, we'll go down to McDonald's and we'll just call it a day, because I just honestly couldn't see anything happening. I was at the back of the swim, doing a few little bits and pieces to camera, and all of a sudden, I had a beep on the receiver, which was in my pocket. Looked round, there's loads of birds over me. I turned to Joe and said, oh, here we go, caught a bird, time to go. And yeah, it just dropped back to the floor, picked it up, and you know, it sounds quite bad, I suppose, looking back at it now. Picked it up, give it one of them thinking that there was going to be a tufty, and picked it up just to be met with solid resistance. Now, my initial thought was I would up to tufty, but the tufty had got snagged on the bottom because there's still a few snags in there. But all of a sudden, I felt it ping off of a dorsal fin and start kicking. So I sort of turned to Joe and was like, well, you know, you ain't going to believe it, but I have actually got a carp on. And it was a really weird fight. It didn't really do a great deal. And you know, Joe was sort of angled onto the rod, so he was capturing the fight as I was playing it in. The fish kited round on a sort of a tight line. The lead hadn't ejected from the clip, and it just done one lunge when it was about 2 or 3 rod lengths out, and sort of Joe took the camera away from his face and looked at me as if to say, you know, that looked like a pretty decent fish. And yeah, the water on B2 is gin clear, and especially with the sun glistening through it as well. And this fish just come in front of us, it gave one solid nod, and as it turned over, it sort of flanked over on the line, and I could see it was a really, really big fish. Now, obviously not wanting to lose it, I was a little bit quiet. Joe sort of stepped back, and it didn't really do a great deal, like not what you'd expect a big fish to do, and it sort of hit the surface, and I got a 14-inch fluorocarbon hook link on, a 4.5 ounce lead, and like, you know, the one time that you'd want the lead to eject would have been now, to have just made everything that little bit easier. But the fish just sort of wallowed around, threw its head up a couple of times, and just went into the net. And yeah, we both looked at each other in absolute amazement, and I knew straight away what fish it was and how big it had been previously, but neither of us expected it to go as big as what it did. And yeah, sure enough, on the scales, 46 pounds and 6 ounces, and yeah, a lake record mirror. So not only had I had an absolutely phenomenal session on burners with the cameras, I got extremely lucky and caught the biggest fish out of Brasenose 2 on a day only session. And now from this, obviously confidence was sky high, went back the following day and blanked. So yeah, so it just goes to show that you ain't going to catch them at home, but also when you're confident, it's very easy to get your confidence knocked again. So yeah, after catching that, a new lake record, which again was all caught on film over on the Carpology page, the following day was a blank. So we're now into December, and obviously that is the time that everyone's prepping for Christmas and getting everything ready. But I had one last session penciled in, and I was hoping to end the year on a high. Now, 2020 has obviously been a very, very bizarre year, and when people have been able to get out fishing, the lakes have been very, very busy, and the fish haven't had much of a rest. So December can be a funny time of the year. You can either hit it right and catch a load of fish, or you can sit there and struggle. Now, I'd had a 3-day session lined up from sort of middle of November. I knew where I was going, I knew what I was going to be doing, and I was hoping that all of the prior preparation, I was going to execute it to to the nth degree, and I was going to catch a few fish, but it wasn't meant to be. And yeah, I started the year on a high by catching quite a few fish, but I ended the year on a 3-night blank, believe it or not, on Brasenose 1. Now, there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. I don't mind admitting it. There's a lot of fish in there, but you can be a million miles away from them if they're not in front of you. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but if they're not there, you simply are not going to catch them. So yeah, so that's 2020. Without any shadow of a doubt, the best year in carp fishing I've ever had. I would say the only gutting thing for me was that I didn't catch 130s. I caught 99, and that was really what I wanted to do. After I caught the 50 was to go for the 100, and that 3-night session, which I blanked on, was the session that I was hoping I was going to catch the 100th one. But it wasn't to be. I'm certainly not complaining, and yeah, 2020 was certainly a year that I think not many of us are going to forget in a hurry.